It started as one of those ideas we didn't think through, a crazy impulse that seemed harmless at the time. The psychiatric hospital on the edge of town had always intrigued us. Rumors about it had been circulating for as long as we could remember. Some whispered it was haunted, others said it had been the site of some disturbing experiments. And a few people even claimed that anyone who stayed inside the building for too long would go mad. But to us, it was all just talk, a bunch of exaggerated stories to scare the unadventurous. I could feel the chill in the evening air as we stood in front of the building, taking in its imposing presence. The hospital was a massive, crumbling structure made of old red bricks that had seen better days. Most of the windows were boarded up, with just a few cracked panes of glass remaining in the upper floors. The front door hung loosely on its hinges, barely clinging to its frame as if it were inviting us in. "There's no way this place is as creepy as they say," Emma said, already stepping forward with a grin on her face. She was always the adventurous one, no hesitation, no second thoughts. If there was trouble to be found, Emma was always the first to find it. I glanced at Sarah, who was nervously fidgeting with the strap of her bag. Sarah wasn't the same as the rest of us. She'd agreed to come with us, but I could tell she didn't want to be here. She was quiet, holding back, looking up at the building as if it was about to swallow us whole. But after some convincing from Emma and Claire, she reluctantly joined the group. Claire, the last of us, wasn't exactly the biggest fan of this kind of thing either, but she went along with it. She had a way of looking at the world as if everything were a mystery, and she was always game to figure it out. The four of us together had been inseparable for years, always finding trouble in places we probably shouldn't have been. But tonight was going to be different. "Let's get inside," I muttered, more to myself than to the others. The idea of what lay inside, whatever secrets it held, was already starting to pull me in. The air was thick with an unsettling silence, and the thought of discovering something new, something hidden, seemed too good to pass up. We pushed the door open, the rusty hinges groaning in protest. Stepping inside, we were greeted by the smell of mold and decay, the unmistakable scent of abandonment. The hallway stretched out in front of us, the floor covered in a mix of shattered glass, old dust, and fallen plaster. The walls were peeling, the remnants of chipped paint barely visible beneath the layers of grime. There was an overwhelming sense of stillness, like the place hadn't been disturbed in years, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just out of sight, waiting. "I'll take the first floor," Emma said, her voice low but eager. "Let's split up and check things out. We'll meet back here in 20 minutes. We each grabbed our flashlights, the beams cutting through the darkness as we walked down the hallway. The light from our flashlights flickered as we explored the rooms, pushing open the doors one by one. The first few rooms were eerily empty, dust-covered desks and old chairs, files scattered across the floor like forgotten memories. The once pristine hospital now felt like a graveyard for the past, everything left to rot and decay. I paused in one room, running my fingers over a broken chair, its wood splintered and warped. My breath fogged up the air in front of me as I inhaled deeply, trying to absorb the atmosphere, the weight of the place. There was something unsettling about it all, the way the silence hung in the air, thick and heavy, like the building was holding its breath. "Nothing interesting here," I called out to the others as I turned to leave the room. But as I reached for the doorknob, I noticed something strange. The walls seemed to be covered in a pattern, almost like faded handprints, as though something had been pressing against them over and over again. "Hey, guys, check this out," I called to Emma, Claire, and Sarah. They came over and glanced at the walls, their faces scrunching up in confusion. "That's creepy," Claire muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. Just as we were about to continue, a sound echoed from down the hall, a faint rustling noise, followed by a sharp, high-pitched scream. The sound made my blood run cold. "What the hell was that?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. She grabbed my arm, her grip tight with fear. "It sounded like a little girl," Emma said, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. But none of us were laughing. I could feel it, something was wrong. The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop, the air turning cold and thick, pressing in on us from all sides. "Let's go check it out," Emma said, her usual confidence waning. She turned and began walking down the corridor toward the sound, and without thinking, the rest of us followed. We moved through the halls with our flashlights in hand, the beams slicing through the pitch-black darkness, but every turn we took seemed to lead to more shadowed corridors. The temperature had dropped noticeably, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. We tried to call out to whoever, whatever, might have been in the building, but our voices seemed to get swallowed by the oppressive silence. Even the rustling of our footsteps felt unnaturally loud against the quiet. "What the hell was that scream?" Claire muttered, her voice tight with fear. She was looking at me with wide, unsettled eyes, and for the first time that night, I saw the uncertainty in her expression. I was beginning to feel it too. We reached a long hallway at the end of the floor, where an old rusted fire escape staircase loomed at the far end. There was a small window beside it, the glass cracked in places but still mostly intact. That was when we heard it again, the sound of a child's scream, sharp and full of terror, echoing from somewhere deeper within the building. The sound was so sudden, so raw that it made my heart skip a beat. I felt Sarah's grip tighten on my arm as she squeezed her eyes shut, clearly trying to block out the terrifying noise. "We need to go," she whispered, her voice trembling. "This isn't funny anymore." Before anyone could respond, Emma, the ever-curious one, took a step toward the window. She pressed her face against the cold glass, peering out into the darkness beyond. "There's something out there," she said, voice low and tense. "It's too dark to see, but I think wait. What's that?" We all crowded around her, straining our eyes to see through the dim light. For a moment there was nothing, just the black void of the hospital grounds, the trees beyond swaying in the wind. But then, as if the darkness itself had shifted, a face appeared in the window. It wasn't a normal face. The face was pale, almost ghostly, with deep-set eyes that gleamed unnaturally bright in the dark, like two glowing orbs. Its expression was twisted, contorted into a grotesque grin that stretched too far across its face, making it look wrong. Horribly wrong. It didn't belong there, didn't belong in the world at all. Its eyes locked with mine through the glass, and for a moment everything went still. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It was like the face had trapped me in place, holding my gaze with its chilling stare. "Oh my God!" Claire gasped, stumbling back in shock. The sound of her voice seemed to break the trance, and the figure in the window disappeared just as quickly as it had appeared. We all backed away from the window, our hearts pounding in our chests. For a moment no one spoke. The air felt too thick, too heavy with the weight of what we had just seen. That wasn't a person, right? Sarah's voice cracked, and I could hear the panic rising in her tone. "That thing, what the hell was that?" "I don't know," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes were wide, darting around the hallway like she was expecting something to jump out at us. "But we need to get the hell out of here. Now." We turned to leave the hallway, but before we could take more than a few steps, we heard it again, the faint sound of something or someone moving in the building. It was the unmistakable sound of footsteps, too slow, too deliberate, as though someone was walking toward us from a distance. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "It's probably just someone else messing with us," Emma said, though her voice was shaky now. "A prank or something." But deep down I could feel it. Whatever was in here, it wasn't a prank. This wasn't a joke. We weren't alone. The footsteps grew louder. They weren't coming from the stairwell or the nearby rooms. They were coming down the hallway toward us. And they were getting closer. We all froze, the cold air wrapping around us like a blanket of dread. "Hide," Claire whispered urgently, her voice barely audible, but all of us understood the gravity of her words. Without another word, we rushed to the nearest door, one of the rooms off to the side. We piled inside, slamming the door shut behind us and pressing our backs against it. My heart was racing. I couldn't focus, couldn't think, only the sound of those footsteps getting closer. We all huddled together in the corner of the room, not daring to make a sound. The silence between us was unbearable, and the only noise we could hear was the pounding of our own hearts in our ears. It felt like hours, even though it had only been a few minutes. The air was thick, heavy, like it was pressing down on us from all sides. Then, without warning, a loud, sharp knock echoed through the room. It was soft at first, like someone testing the door, feeling for any movement, any response. We didn't dare to breathe, not wanting to give ourselves away. But then the knocking grew louder, more frantic, as if whoever, whatever, was on the other side was growing impatient. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was jarring, like the pounding of a drum in the otherwise silent room. My stomach twisted with fear. The knocking continued, getting louder and faster, until it was almost deafening. The wall seemed to vibrate with the force of it, and all I could do was squeeze my eyes shut, praying that it would stop. But it didn't. The knocking didn't stop. It just kept pounding against the door, louder and louder. It was almost like the person, or whatever was on the other side, was trying to break it down. I could feel the tremor in my hands as I gripped the flashlight tighter, my knuckles white from the pressure. Knock, knock, knock. It was frantic now, rapid fire, like a desperate plea or a demand. My heart raced and I could feel the blood pulsing in my temples. I knew we couldn't stay here. We couldn't just wait around and hope whatever was out there would get bored and leave. The air in the room was suffocating, and every sound, every creak, every knock made the terror claw deeper into my chest. I glanced around at the others, their faces pale and drawn, wide eyes reflecting the same terror I felt. Claire was visibly shaking, her body tense like a coiled spring. Sarah was holding her breath, barely making a sound, her hand pressed against her mouth in a futile attempt to silence the fear. Emma was the only one who didn't seem to be falling apart. She was the one who had dragged us into this in the first place, and I guess I thought she'd be the one to get us out too. But even she looked unnerved. Her eyes darted around the room like she was searching for an escape, but there was no way out. The door was the only exit, and we weren't about to open it, not with the knocks growing more insistent by the second. Knock, knock, knock. A loud thud followed, and the door jolted violently in its frame. It felt like someone had kicked it with all their might. We all flinched back, a collective gasp filling the room as the vibration from the impact rippled through our bodies. I could hear my own pulse in my ears now, the beat of it so loud it almost drowned out the sounds outside. "Please stop," Sarah whispered, but it was more of a plea to the universe than to anything or anyone outside the door. The knocking continued, relentless, as though mocking our fear. And then, as if the world had gone silent for a moment, a new sound filled the air. A soft voice, almost like a child's whisper, came from the other side of the door. "Let me in." My blood ran cold. The voice was high-pitched and sweet at first, but then it warped into something darker, something guttural, as though the speaker was fighting to hold onto its innocence. "Let me in, let me in," it repeated, growing more demanding, more sinister with every iteration. The voice seemed to move, like it was circling the room, closing in on us from every angle. I was frozen, unable to even process what was happening. Sarah, who had been on the verge of panic, grabbed my arm so hard I thought she might bruise me. Her grip was almost desperate now. "What is that?" she gasped, her voice a mixture of terror and disbelief. "I don't know," I whispered back, my voice shaky, barely above a breath. It was like the voice was coming from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It didn't make sense. How could something like this be happening? The knocking had stopped, replaced now by the eerie, sickening voice that seemed to slide under your skin and burrow deep into your mind. I felt my heartbeat in my throat, and the air felt impossibly thick, pressing down on us like a heavy blanket. The room had become unbearably hot, suffocating even, as if the walls themselves were closing in. I took a step back, my feet scraping against the floor, and suddenly I heard the unmistakable sound of breathing. It was right behind me. I whirled around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing. Just the suffocating air and the low, unsettling silence that filled the room. My breath came in shallow gasps, and I couldn't tell if the fear was suffocating me or if the room itself was slowly crushing the life out of me. "What's happening?" Claire whispered, her voice trembling, her eyes wide with panic. "Is this real?" Before I could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway outside the room. The air seemed to shift, vibrating with tension. My stomach churned as the footsteps grew louder, moving in our direction, slow but deliberate. Every footstep sounded like a death sentence. And then the door handle began to turn. The door handle rattled violently in its frame, and for a moment, I could have sworn I felt the pressure of a cold, invisible hand pressing against it from the other side. The air in the room grew heavier, and the tension was unbearable. I held my breath, barely daring to move. My heart pounded so loudly in my chest that it drowned out all other sounds. I could feel it in my throat, my ears, the rhythm of it coursing through my whole body. The door handle continued to turn, slowly, deliberately, and with every second that passed, the room felt like it was shrinking around us. I wanted to scream, wanted to run, but my feet were rooted to the floor and my body refused to obey. Click! The door creaked open a fraction, just enough for the darkness outside to press in. My eyes widened and I instinctively backed up, trying to put as much space between me and the door as possible. We all did. No one dared make a sound. Nothing happened for a few long seconds. Then through the narrow opening I saw it. At first I thought it was just a shadow, a trick of the light, but no. No, this was real. Standing in the doorway, just beyond the threshold, was a figure, a small, black silhouette, too small to be an adult but too tall to be a child. Its shape was distorted, as if it were constantly shifting, like it couldn't quite keep its form stable. The figure stood there, silent, its face obscured by the blackness around it, but I could feel its eyes on me. I could feel its presence pressing against me, suffocating me. The thing didn't move. It just stared, its body frozen in place as if waiting for us to make the first move. I wanted to run. I wanted to bolt out of that room, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. They felt like lead, and I could feel the weight of the air around me pushing me down. But then the figure began to move. It was slow at first, like it was unsure of itself, but with every step it took, I could feel the building itself shake. The floor beneath us groaned in protest as the thing crept toward us, its movement unsettlingly unnatural. We all froze in place, hearts in our throats, eyes locked on the figure. The air felt thick, heavy with dread as it crept closer, dragging itself forward with an eerie, dragging motion. Then, without warning, a loud bang echoed through the room, the sound of something slamming against the door. We all screamed in unison, and I didn't even think, I just ran. We all ran. I rushed toward the window, but the floor felt like it was shaking beneath me, and the wall seemed to twist and close in. My chest was tight, my breath coming in shallow, panicked gasps. I couldn't focus, couldn't think, only that we had to get out, we had to get away from whatever that thing was. Behind me, I heard Claire's voice, high-pitched and panicked, "It's following us." I didn't dare look back, but I could hear it. The thing was following us, its footsteps echoing in the hallway. They were too fast, too close. Each step felt like a heartbeat, like it was right behind us, like it was gaining on us. We rushed through the hallway, searching for any exit, any way out, but every corner we turned only led us deeper into the building. It was like the building itself had become a maze, twisting and warping with every step we took. Nothing made sense anymore. The wall seemed to be closing in, and the hallway stretched out impossibly long as if time itself was warping. And then we saw it. At the end of the hall, there was a flickering light, a tiny dim bulb that cast a feeble glow against the darkened walls. It looked like an exit. I wasn't sure if it was real or if we were just imagining it, but I couldn't care. I had to get out. I ran toward the light, but as I did, I heard something behind me. A scream so loud, so wild, it sent chills running up my spine. It wasn't a scream from one of us. It wasn't a human scream. It sounded like something twisted, something broken, something that wasn't supposed to be alive. I turned, and that's when I saw it. The figure was standing at the end of the hallway, just past the light. Its face, if you could call it a face, was grotesque, twisted beyond recognition, with wide, hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through me. Its mouth was a gaping hole, twisted into a sickening grin, and I could feel its malice, its hunger. I don't know how I kept running. The sound of its footsteps was deafening, each one sending a ripple of terror through my entire body. My mind was screaming at me to stop, to turn back, to hide. But I couldn't. I couldn't stop. We reached the door at the end of the hall, but as we tried to open it, the handle wouldn't budge. Bang! Something slammed into the door behind us with such force that the entire room shook. I barely managed to hold on to my sanity, my mind teetering on the edge of breaking. "Come on, come on!" I screamed, pulling at the handle with all my strength. Then the door flew open. We burst through the door and into a narrow, dark hallway. I could barely see, but the dim glow from the flickering light at the end of the corridor was enough to keep me moving. The air felt colder now, as if the building itself was breathing in slow, heavy gasps, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. "Go! Go!" I yelled, my voice hoarse, desperate. Claire and Sarah were right behind me, but I could hear the sound of footsteps growing louder, closer. The thing was still chasing us, its presence crawling along the walls, filling the space with a suffocating weight. I glanced over my shoulder, and that's when I saw it again. The figure. It was there at the end of the hall, its twisted form gliding along the floor with an unnatural, fluid movement. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark, two pits of nothingness that seemed to pierce right through me. The air around it rippled like the figure was distorting reality itself. Every step it took felt like an echo of doom, getting closer with every breath I took. "We can't outrun it!" Sarah screamed, panic creeping into her voice. Her legs were shaking, and she was barely keeping up with us. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. We had no plan, no idea how to get out of this place. It was like we were trapped in some kind of nightmare, one that wouldn't let us wake up. We reached another door at the end of the hallway. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the handle. I threw my weight against it, praying it would open, and thank God it did. We spilled into the next room, slamming the door shut behind us with a force that rattled the walls. But we weren't safe. I could hear the thing's footsteps still, slow, methodical, like it was toying with us, enjoying the chase. Its breath was a low, guttural sound that made the back of my throat tighten with dread. We couldn't keep running forever. "What do we do?" Claire gasped, her voice trembling. She was clutching her flashlight like it was a weapon, but it wasn't going to stop whatever was chasing us. I looked around the room, trying to think, to make sense of our situation. The room was empty, except for some old furniture, rotting chairs, a broken table, dust covering every surface. The windows were boarded up, and the walls were covered in peeling paint. It looked like we had entered some kind of storage area, but there was no exit, no way out. That's when I heard it. A tiny, high-pitched giggle. I froze. The sound was so small, so innocent, that for a split second I thought maybe, just maybe, it was one of us, maybe a joke. But no. I felt the hair on my neck stand on end, and the giggle, it didn't sound like a child. It sounded wrong. It sounded like it was trying to mimic a child's laugh, but it was distorted, twisted in a way that made my stomach churn. "We need to get out of here," Sarah whispered urgently. But as she spoke, the giggling grew louder. It wasn't just one giggle anymore. It was multiple, coming from all directions, echoing through the room like it was surrounding us. I tried the door. Locked. Of course. The giggling stopped abruptly. In its place came the sound of running footsteps. The floorboards creaked beneath heavy, dragging steps, too fast for something that wasn't human. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it, but there was no explanation. I could hear the thing's heavy breathing, each inhale a strained rest that made my blood run cold. Bang! The door behind us slammed open with such force that the wood cracked. I spun around, and there it was. The figure. It was standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light from the hallway, its hollow eyes glowing brighter now. The shape of its face was clearer, and it looked even worse up close. Its mouth hung open, twisted and gaping, as if it was constantly trying to smile, but its grin was too wide, too grotesque. I couldn't breathe. My mind went blank, and for a split second I thought we were done for. This was it. We were trapped, with nowhere left to run. And then it did something that made my blood freeze. It smiled. Not just with its mouth, but with its whole body, as though it was pleased with our terror. Its face contorted, the smile widening to an impossible degree, its eyes burning with an unnatural light. "We need to get out. Now!" I screamed, and that was all it took. We didn't need any more urging. We all turned and ran for the only exit, the window. We bolted toward the window, all of us scrambling, hearts pounding like war drums in our chests. The window was still wide open, and the cold night air outside felt like salvation. We could hear the creature behind us getting closer, its footsteps echoing louder with every second, as though it was right on our heels. I reached the window first, shoving my body through the opening, the glass scraping against my skin. I didn't care. I didn't care about anything but getting out of there. The others were right behind me, all of us pushing as hard as we could to get out of the nightmare that had trapped us. I felt the cold air rush in as I tumbled out onto the grass below, landing hard but rolling to my feet without stopping. I barely registered the pain in my arms and legs, the scrape on my knee from the rough landing. None of it mattered. What mattered was getting away, getting as far from that building as possible. Behind me, I heard the screeching of the window's frame as Claire and Sarah managed to crawl out, but the sound of the footsteps, the dragging, heavy steps, was still too close. It was too fast. We weren't going to make it. And then it happened. I glanced back just in time to see the thing's face, a grotesque, twisted mess of features, appear at the window. Its glowing eyes locked onto mine, and for a split second I saw something in those eyes that I couldn't quite comprehend. It was hunger, yes, but there was something else. Something worse. The creature's mouth opened wide, too wide, stretching almost impossibly far as it let out a guttural, inhuman scream that shattered the silence of the night. It was the kind of scream that rattled your bones, that clawed at your insides and left you frozen in place. It was the scream of something that had been waiting for us to make a mistake. I turned away, my body on autopilot, running faster than I thought possible. We were almost there, just a little further, when I heard it. The sound of rapid footsteps behind us, getting faster, closing the distance. I risked a glance back, and there it was, its twisted form, still crawling toward us at an unnatural speed. Its face was stretched in that horrible, wide grin, and its glowing eyes were locked onto us with a terrifying certainty. It wasn't just chasing us. It was hunting us. But we weren't going to let it catch us. We reached the trees, the dense forest finally offering some cover, but the thing wasn't slowing down. It moved faster, faster than anything that should be able to move, and with every step it took, the ground seemed to shake beneath us. I could hear Claire's labored breathing, Sarah's terrified sobs, but we kept running. The sound of the thing's pursuit was right behind us, echoing in the still night, getting louder with every step. We had to make it out. We reached the edge of the forest, and in the distance I could see the faint lights of the town. It was so close. Just a little farther. The thing was still behind us, and I could hear it scream, its horrible, gurgling scream, rising in volume. It wasn't just chasing us anymore. It was mocking us, trying to break us down, to make us stop running. It wanted us to give up. But we didn't stop. We didn't look back. We kept running, pushing ourselves harder until finally we burst out of the trees and onto the road. We didn't stop until we were safe. We kept running, not knowing if the creature had stopped or if it was still chasing us, but we didn't look back. When we finally made it to the main street, gasping for breath, our hearts still pounding like drums, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, watching us, waiting for us to slip up. I don't know how long we stood there, just breathing, looking back at the forest, half expecting it to erupt with that thing's terrible form. But nothing happened. The road was quiet. The lights of the town flickered in the distance, and we were safe. We didn't speak for a long time. None of us said a word about what had just happened. We just stood there, trying to comprehend what we had gone through, what we had survived. And even now I can't stop thinking about it. Every time I close my eyes, I see those glowing eyes, that twisted smile, and I hear that scream, echoing in my mind like a distant memory I can't escape. I'll never forget that night. And I don't think I'll ever be able to walk past that building again. We didn't speak about it again, not for a long time. It was like we had all agreed, without saying a word, that some things were better left unsaid. But the images, the sounds, the terror we felt stayed with us. Every night, I would wake up drenched in sweat, that same scream echoing in my ears, the image of its eyes burning in the back of my mind. It was a feeling that couldn't be shaken off, no matter how much time passed. It wasn't until weeks later that we finally gathered again, all three of us, sitting in Sarah's living room, our faces pale and drawn, haunted by the same nightmare we'd shared that night. I still hear it, Claire whispered, her voice trembling. Sometimes when I'm alone, I think I can hear footsteps behind me. Just like in that place. It's like it's waiting for me to go back. Sarah nodded, her eyes wide. I know what you mean. It's like I can't escape it. Like it's always there, just outside my window, watching. Waiting. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The fear was still there, gnawing at me, even in the safety of my own home. But I knew they felt it too. We all did. We never went back to that hospital. I couldn't even look at it from a distance without feeling a shiver crawl up my spine. The thought of stepping foot in that place again was unbearable. Every corner of that building, every dark hallway, every creaking door, it was all alive in my memories. And I couldn't go back to that. But we learned something from that night. Sometimes the things we encounter in the dark, the things that make us feel small and helpless, they don't just stay in the shadows. They follow us long after the danger has passed. They haunt us in our waking hours, in our quiet moments, reminding us that some doors should never be opened. Some places should never be explored. And no matter how far we ran, no matter how many miles we put between ourselves and that building, I knew deep down that whatever we had encountered, whatever that thing was, it wasn't done with us. It was still out there, waiting,